What's going on, everyone? Coach Jason here,
Coach Patrick.
and we are back with another episode of the Mach 1 method because we're going to be talking about stretching.
Ooh.
And it's maybe some people's favorite thing to do, maybe some people's least favorite thing to do. So we're going to talk about the ins and outs of why it's important, and we'll kind of take it from there and surprise you all. So, Coach Pat, why is stretching important? I guess first and foremost, should you stretch at all?
So I think stretching is essential. There's different kinds of stretching, which we'll get into in a little bit, but I think it's essential, it's important. And why is it important? The muscles have to have some sort of elasticity. At the joint, there's going to be tension. If the muscle's not gliding the way that it needs to, you don't have that range of motion. You're going to have restricted movement patterns, compensations, more pain, more risk of injury. They're going to compromise your range of motion while training, so you're not going to get full muscle development. Yep. You're going to have, for lack of better terms, lack of gains, right? And then, you really are leaving a lot of potential on the table if you're not doing the right stretches before your workout and also after your workout.
Great. I think a key word for me there is limiting, and stretching unlocks limitations, and improving your mobility, again, breaks through those barriers. The more limited in your mobility, the more limited you're going to be in not only the results you're going to get, but just in life in general.
For sure.
There's plenty of ways where, whether it's simply just like reaching down to tie your shoe, or reaching something overhead.
Putting your seatbelt on and not being able to turn your head or body.
Those are extreme examples of where limitations actually hinder your day-to-day life. But in the gym, it's going to hinder your performance for exactly the reasons that you talked about too. I think you're going to be able to grow, for example, in your legs if you're doing squats. If you physically can't squat to a deep range of motion versus if you can, the muscles that you're going to recruit at deeper ranges of motion are literally going to be different. You're not going to get much glute activation at all if you're not able to get down into a deep squat, because those muscles aren't going to be stretched. You're going to be focusing primarily on the quads. So you might notice that your quads get developed, from doing squats at a short range of motion. If you can't squat low and you're not doing specific glute work, now you could be developing some muscle imbalances from not getting down into that range of motion. That's just one example.
So you're telling me underdeveloped glutes can be a byproduct of tight calves?
Absolutely.
Bum, bum.
Yeah.
Da-da-da. So I would say that's something that can bring this to the next level. Is you don't have to just stretch what you're working on. If it's bench day, you don't just stretch the pecs, right? You want to make sure that the hips are feeling nice and loose. You can get good leg drive. You stay connected to the bench, right?
Yeah.
So if you have tight hip flexors, that can be compromising your bench press. If you have tight calves, that can be compromising your glute development. If you have tight lats, that can be limiting your overhead press and your shoulder development, right? There's a lot of ways that it's compromising outside of just warming the body up for the exercise.
So you kind of alluded to different kinds of stretching. So what would those different types of stretching be?
Let's start off with static stretching. That's your basic touch your toes, count to 10 and hold the stretch. There's dynamic, which is stretching through range of motion. So you're actively going through end range and back, kind of priming it. This was more warm-up style stretching. Then we have more a ballistic stretch, which is going to be, more of that plyometric primer, making sure that, when you sprint, you don't pull your hammy, those kind of things. So there's different kinds of stretching like that. Then there's also looking at it from a flexibility versus mobility standpoint. You have eccentric loading, where you're going through a stretched position under load, increasing your ability to get in those positions,
right? Tolerate
load, kind of reprogramming the body to know it's safe to get into that position, right? So there's a lot of different kind of stretching, and each one has its own purpose. But I say, rather than should you do one or the other, it's when should you do one or the other. You should do them all in some capacity, with the exception of the ballistic. That's probably a little more advanced and specialty. But
right. So I guess let's kind of go through one by one. So when would you recommend static stretching, and when would you recommend doing dynamic stretching, and how does that look like?
Dynamic stretching should be prior to training. Static stretching should be after. The reason we do dynamic before is we're going to get the stretch of the muscle. We're going to, slowly expose it to those range of motion. Get into it, get out of it. Get into it, get out of it. So it's kind of making it more like pliable and malleable of like the muscle belly and the tissue. And then that's also going to help pump in some fresh oxygenated blood. So we're getting increased circulation, elasticity, that's going to really get you ready for the exercise without going into what the static stretch will do. That's going to soothe the muscle. It's going to lengthen it, and that can get rid of its contractile forces.
Right.
So like the muscle will contract all or nothing. However, you can control the force of which the contraction is, right? So you can control force even though the muscle is an all or nothing contraction.
Yeah.
Getting back onto static, you limit your force output by holding the stretch, lengthening it, relaxing it. So if you go and do something like a jump or a heavy squat, you're going to not reach your max potential there. So you would save that for after the workout when you're cooling down.
Right. And for, those listening who may not have studied exercise science, these are not just like assumptions. These are chemical properties of the muscle. When you go into like a deep stretch, your muscles release certain enzymes that cause a relaxation, like what you're saying, and inhibit certain force production.
Yep.
And, the opposite is true. What you're effectively saying with dynamic stretching is that it's essentially like warming up, right? And getting your body acclimated towards certain ranges of motion. It's the reason why you don't just get into the gym and on a bench press day and put 315 on. You do the bar, you do one plate, you do 2 plates, and then you build your way up. So I guess just to cap off that aspect of stretching, what would be like an example, a dynamic stretch for a static stretch for the same muscle group?
Okay. So like hamstrings, common area people carry tension. So like a toe scoop where you dig the heel into the ground, reach down under, scoop up, stand tall, go back down, create that scoop. That's dynamic. We're doing it through motion, where if you sit down, feet out in front, touch your toes, hold it, breathe through it, relax into the stretch, 10, 20, 30 seconds without a change of position, that's static. Same hamstrings, but dynamic versus static.
Exactly. So that's really good. What kind of common mistakes do you see in the gym when people are approaching their mobility? Like for me, in my experience, when I've seen new people come into the gym, I think there is a little bit of a learning curve of what mobility and flexibility are, as they are some different, there are some key differences between the two, but
what are they?
Good question. So flexibility would specifically refer to how long the muscle can stretch, whereas mobility would be your access to ranges of motion with like multi-joints included in that. So like you're saying like a seated toe reach, or like even like a lying down like leg raise would be like a display of hamstring flexibility, but a deep squat would be a display of, full hip mobility. It's more related to the joint rather than to the muscle. Right?
Good clarification.
That's what we're here for.
People are learning stuff. I love it.
That's it. But yeah, I guess going back to my question, what are some common mistakes you see that people make when they approach mobility and stretching?
I would say part of the warm-up, the dynamic component of it, isn't just going through the range that's comfortable. It's actually priming the body to go through the movement that's required or demanded upon you for the exercise. So we'll see it, even with our Olympic lifters, where we want them squatting full range of motion ass to grass, but they're doing hip stretches at partial range of motion because that's where it feels uncomfortable. And I'm like, if it's uncomfortable now, you're not going to be comfortable in a full squat, right? Taking the initiative to get there, push beyond it, push beyond it, push beyond it. That's what's going to prime your body so that way it's more comfortable receiving the weight in those proper positions. Otherwise, like you're just going through the motions and you're not really priming the body. So I would say the biggest mistake is don't stop when you feel a stretch. Stop when you reach your end range, and then try and increase that with every rep.
I totally agree. I think like if I were to give like an opposite end is true also, like make sure you're also easing into your end range. You're not just going there. Like you said at the beginning when we first started, like you don't want to be like full sprint and then you tear your hamstring. That happens because you didn't warm up properly. You know, if you know, we've been talking about toe scoops, so just use that as an example. You know, maybe your first 1 or 2 reps is towards like the bottom of the knee. Your next 2 reps are towards the middle of the calf. Then you're getting closer to the ankle, and then you're getting closer to the floor. So you're doing 10 reps of toe scoops, but not every rep is necessarily identical. It's progressive, and it's slowly introducing more range of motion over time. And I think that's also like a key distinguishment between that dynamic.
That the bench press warm up that you provided, the 1 plate, 2 plate, build up to 3 plates, right?
Yeah.
Same concept with your range of motion. If you, I don't know, say 24 inches, the next rep you do 25, 26, 30, right? You build your way into that range of motion rather than just going 32 right off the bat. And then you're like, you know, exactly. Then, you know, now you're sitting on the sideline with an ice pack versus like actually feeling optimized.
Flashbacks for those who know. But if you are,
you might.
But if you are, hope the hamstring's feeling better. But cool. I think like, you know, the whole realm of like mobility and kind of coming back to like the center. I was going to say like, you know, the overarching topic of today is like, should you stretch, right? And the answer we're coming to is yes, as long as you're doing
the right form at the right time.
Right form at the right time, exactly. Do you ever recommend like, you know, you mentioned doing dynamic stretching at the beginning, static stretching at the end. Is there ever a time where it is or isn't appropriate to skip one or the other or both?
Yes. This is going to get a little nuancy here, but let's go into like the world of corrective exercises. Right? So first what we want to do is go through inhibition. Hop on the foam roller, lax ball, massage gun, something like that. Let the tissue relax. Then what we want to do is we want to lengthen after that. So that's going to require a little bit more of a static stretch, right? After we inhibit and lengthen that muscle, then we're going to have to go through reprogramming it. So we'll use the squat, for example. We actually just did a post with Lauren on her adductors being really tight. So we rolled it, we inhibited those so it wasn't pulling back on it. We lengthened it so that way it was all stretched out and we're not playing tug of war with tight tissue. And then we went through activation, strengthening the opposing muscles, and then we patterned it. So we went through a squat, we did it very controlled, very specifically, and then our final step is to start loading it, right? So using the squat pattern, we did some static stretching right immediately after foam rolling, and then we went into like a dynamic hip abduction, external rotation hybrid there with the fire hydrant, so that way her hips were balanced and aligned, and then we were able to recognize the pattern and get her in the position we needed her to, right? So you could use static as a way to correct something. However, the category of that is we did do dynamic after to reframe that, right? So it could be static and then dynamic as part of a warm-up if you're working on a correction.
So to kind of sum it up, you know, an instance that you're talking about where static stretching before a workout could be appropriate is in the effort of restoring range of motion properly.
Correct. Yeah, like you kind of have to unlock it, and then once it's available, then you have to prime it, and then you go into loading it. Where sometimes you can go through these dynamic stretches, but still be like bound up and not access that range of motion required from you.
Exactly.
And then I guess a little bonus tip for those watching is when you're sore, because we did our DOMS talk for our 25th episode, right?
Yeah.
So if you have DOMS, dynamic stretching is way more beneficial than static stretching for like that severe soreness as well. Like
why would that be?
Get moving. Motion is lotion. So what we're doing is we're exposing it to those gradual progressions of range of motion like we were talking about, but we're also contracting and relaxing, contracting and relaxing. We're getting that blood pumping in, we're flushing it out. So the soreness has to do with the acidity of like the hydrogen. So we're flushing out the hydrogen, we're getting oxygen in there, we're going through and metabolizing all that, we're getting it ready for the next training day. So like dynamic warm up dynamic stretches is definitely the way to go to kind of get your body moving. And then once it's all nice and loosey-goosey, go into your statics. Keep that long range of motion into the next day, you know, kind of reset the pathways.
I guess like, so you're describing like being really sore. If you're sore from a really hard workout, if you go into a really, I think a lot of people may not view stretching in any capacity as like an intense form of exercise, but end range of motion stretching is intense on the body. So if you go from, all right, I'm really sore from a hard workout, let me just go and do a full range of motion intense stretch. You're risking more injury, or, you know, you're not doing anything conducive for recovery, like with what you're saying. So you still need to ease in, warm up the tissues, get it ready to be primed for a stretching routine.
And like Pilates and bar classes, like the whole benefit of that style of training is you're training near end range of motion, right? So if you're sore after like a Pilates or a bar style workout, that's just because you're working at end range, right? Exactly. So like if you're getting there and you're stretching there, like you might be sore, to your point, right? And there's a whole style of exercise dedicated to that.
Those classes don't start with the hardest stuff either. They start you off easy. They make sure the body is warm. They make sure the tissues are loose before they get into that advanced style of training.
So bar is bar, but yeah, I'd say stretching is important. There's times and places for each kind. Probably do all of them with the exception of like specific demographics doing ballistic stretching. And then make sure that you're doing it intentionally, not just going through the range of motion or through the motions of it.
Love that.
Anything else?
I think that's it for today. If you have any questions about stretching or mobility, drop it in the comments. We do save all of our questions for Q&As in the future, so your question will definitely be addressed. So until next time, Mach 1 out.